Hello, and today I am going to cover the everyday muscles, what your therapist may tell you about, what you may see on social media, and maybe some muscles you don't know about. And I'm going to try and give you some connections. So it's very simple, it's very basic, and these are the muscles that I think everyone should know for everyday working their horse. So we're going to start off with the most common muscle group, which we hear about all the time, which is the hamstring group. This is my model for the day because my horses don't work for a living. So the hamstring group mainly consists of three muscles. So we have the biceps femoris, which runs down here and goes off into three parts. So big muscle swooping down, and then we can see 1, 2, 3 parts here. Then as we turn the horse around, we have the semitendinosus muscle and the semimembranosus muscle. So often when the horse is overworked, you will see like that little telltale bubble butt and a line starting to form along here. And all that means is the horse is taking the strain off somewhere else and trying to load this area. It could mean it's unbalanced. It could mean that it doesn't want to put too much weight onto its stifles or its hocks. But often when you get your horse, this has happened a long time ago when they were young, and trying to get it less is quite hard work. So the most prominent one you may see is the semitendinosus, as this has connections to the tail has connections to the sacrum, and at the front of the part of the sacrum down deep below we have the sacroiliac joints. As we will stay on the back, we have the gastrocnemius, which is the equivalent to your calf muscle. And this has a long tendon, so we know tendon connects muscle to bone, which goes over the back of the hock, or the calcaneus, sort of hugs the hock. And then as we come round to the side, we have a smaller muscle, and often in anatomy, especially human anatomy, the smaller the part, the least significant it is. But the significant part about this is the soleus actually attaches to the gastrocnemius tendon. So very important. And when we do look at the leg muscles, so we usually have the extensors towards the front, the flexors towards the back. These muscles, the tendons of these muscles will go right down and even go down to the pedal bone. So we just have to think of the tendon below as an extension of the muscle. So if we have dysfunction in one, we may have dysfunction in another. As we come through here, we have the quadriceps femoris, so quad 4. So on the outside, we have the vastus lateralis. As we come through here, we have the rectus femoris. And then on the inside, we have the vastus medialis and the vastus intermedius. So when I'm working on muscles, if I'm working on the quadriceps, I'll be going on the outside and the inside simultaneously. I always say when I work muscles, I don't want to work on a muscle. If I can, I want to, if there's more than one part, I want to wrap round and hug a muscle. So always think of hugging rather than working on. So as we come up through here, we have the tensor fasciae latae, so part muscle, part fascia, and you'll see this when you're working your horse, and we'll see this tight line going down here like a pulled tight muscle. That will be your tensor fasciae latae. So it's really important that the biceps femoris, the quadriceps, these all support correct movement of the stifle. So often if your therapist does kinesiotaping and they want to offer a little bit of support to the stifle, you'll see them do a big sweeping thing around the biceps femoris and then another piece of tape coming around the quads and going on the inside if you can get it to stick. I know you can spray, but I ain't spraying inside there. So like I said before, what happens here is we start to get this line, a definite line here. And this is the start of the gluteal fascia. So is it fascia? Is it muscle? Do we have to work one? I think we have to work both. And underneath here, we will have the superficial fascia. We will have the medial gluteal, which we have a gluteal tongue part, which comes and sweeps over. They're the two muscles that you will see maybe bulging at the back of your saddle. It's really important. We have quite a lot of big, strong muscles here, not only for movement, but the vital organs are protected by the rib cage, and the other delicate organs are usually protected by this big muscular structure above. So we have the iliopsoas, so we have the psoas minor. Again, in humans, they'll just disregard it because it's small. We have the psoas major, and then we have the iliacus. And often it sort of can extend right up to rib 14, so quite far. As we come through here, an extension through the gluteal fascia, we will come on to the thoracolumbar fascia, which goes all along here. And then down below here, which is not shown, we have the abdominal fascia. And often, again, it can be shown as two separate structures, but then we have a connective part here called the aponeurosis. Now, aponeurosis is simply a fascial sheet that connects muscle to muscle. So at the end of the muscle, we have the tendon, which connects to bone, and the tendon will lengthen and shorten as the horse moves, but the aponeurosis is like a shock absorber for the muscles, so it will store energy and take all the shock there. So this is a big fascial sheet called the aponeurosis. So often if you're looking at anatomy books and you see these big white marks, they're usually the fascia. As we come along here, we have the longissimus, and often people just think the longissimus is a back muscle, but it goes, a lot of these muscles will have different parts, and they will span usually from sort of the second or the third vertebrae right through to the sacral bone. So what often, again, the easy way to remember, if you have a muscle name, usually before or after the muscle name, you will have the location where it is. And that's the easiest way to remember. So if we look at the trapezius, we have the cervicus part, which is the neck, and then we have the thoracis part, which is the torso or the thorax. So it's sort of self-explanatory and easy way to remember. As we come down through here, we have the intercostals. So in between each rib, there is muscle. And then as we come down here, we have the obliques and the abdominals. As we come over here, we have the latissimus dorsi. So often this is where I try and explain, just because we get one reaction in one place, it may mean something. If we have two reactions in two different places, it still could mean that that muscle is giving us a different story. So if I went to a horse, especially at this time of year, we tend to find horses are more on the forehand because they have their heads down eating the nice grass. They tend not to be eating, browsing. They become more grazers. So they don't eat hedge or tree height. And often a lot of strain can come through this part here. So we can see horses that get sore here. They can slightly overdevelop in this area. So you'll see a little bulge of muscle here. And often when you give it a scratch, the horses are like, oh, I love that. So if I get a reaction here through the pectorals and up to the back of here, but I also get a reaction here, we automatically think this is always a saddle issue. But if we have a reaction here and here, it could be that the latissimus is taking a little bit of strain, and it could even be a foot issue. Then as we come over here, we have the triceps group. So we have things like the long head and the lateral head of the triceps. So tells you where it is, tells you what type of muscle it is. We have the teres minor. And then as we come along here, I'm going to miss out the subclavius first because it's part of the pectoral group. So we have the scapula here. We have a big bony prominence down the center of the scapula, which is called the spine. And in front of that spine, we have the supraspinatus. And then at the back of the spine, we have the infraspinatus. And then the next one here is the deltoideus, which covers part of the infraspinatus. So often these two muscles, the infra and supraspinatus, can be affected by something called Sweeney shoulder. And what happens is we have the suprascapular nerve, which is down here. And the reason why it's called Sweeney shoulder, so fun fact, I'm full of like little trivia, is that in the olden days, horses were less pleasure horses, so they were work horses and they would wear a harness. And the consistent pressure here would end up damaging the nerve. And because the nerve is a motor nerve, you would pretty quickly get atrophy or wastage in these two muscles. So if a horse has it today, It's often through a trauma, running into something, or a kick from another horse, especially when introducing horses to new field mates. And within 7 to 10 days, usually these muscles have wasted pretty much. You need to sort of get your vet because they may prescribe anti-inflammatories to let everything calm down. But the reason why it's called Sweeney shoulder is because the harness name was a Sweeney harness. Trivia for you. So then as we come through here, we can see the trapezius. Again, it's book anatomically correct, but real life not really anatomically correct, but I can't change it. It drives me nuts. Often this muscle can come right down here, and even can in circumstances come down to the brachiophalicus. So again, we have the cervicus, cervical part, and we have the thoracus, which is the thoracic part, the thorax part. Then here, again, we have the serratus, so we have the ventralis part here, and we have the thoracus part here. So you can see, for me, people sort of say serrated knives, but I always think they look like feathers. So they sort of like this. Then as we come over here, we have the rhomboideus, which starts up here and comes down here. And often it's quite prominent. If you run your fingers in front of the scapula, you will feel that bumpy muscle there. Now, just because we see it all the time, a lot of times because it's seen, we think it's normal. But this is quite a deep muscle, so we need to ask ourselves, why is such a deep muscle so prominent? And often we'll interlink the rhomboideus and the tensor fasciae latae, meaning that your horse is not balanced. But again, it could be that it wasn't balanced years ago and you've bought it 10 years later, and trying to undo all that work is really hard, and sometimes it can be impossible. So as we come down here, we have the splenius. So the splenius is what you will see in those warm blood photographs, where the horse has got this really, really big, thick muscle running through the center of the neck. And often the issue comes when we think this is overwork or underwork, so hypertrophy or atrophied, we often think this is the issue. But often when you see one atrophy, you often see another muscle that's trying to do its job and beginning to overwork. So often below, above, in front and behind is also the issue. And even this could be a hind end issue. So we always have to think global when we're thinking of the horse. Then as we come down, again, the most common one we'll know in the neck is the brachiophalicus muscle. And this will go from poll and insert down onto the humerus. But what a lot of people don't talk about is the omotransversaris, which starts midway here and actually attaches to the scapular fascia. And these do a very similar job, as in lifting the head and protracting the forelimb, and we'll add some flexion as well, so turning sideways, or lateral bend, sorry. And what happens here is, so we have to think of the reflex points on the horse. So the reflex points are the horse's autonomic safety. The horse has no control over it. And what it is to protect the horse years gone by from predators attacking either things like the soft underbelly or the soft underneck, or to bounce them off if they jumped on. So we have reflex points here, which we will manipulate to get them to do that little pelvic tilt. They have one here, which a lot of people will go and dig in. They have one here. Again, they have one here, which we will ask for the belly lift, but they also have one at the base of the neck. So often we call it a flight muscle, the brachiophalicus, but often we can be the instigators of that flight. So if we go in and we grab it to show people that it's reactive, if anybody grabbed your neck quickly, you would be reactive. B, do we then become the predator before we've even begun our work? So are we falling at the first hurdle of trying to aid relaxation? So we don't want to be a predator, so we don't need to be grabbing and dragging that muscle. And the other thing with reflex points is if you keep poking them enough, they will eventually become non-reactive. So the point becomes non-reactive, but also the horse becomes non-reactive because it knows it's tried to tell you in the beginning that it didn't like it and you just continued. So what is the point of the horse saying anything? They'll often turn around and try and bite. All these things but we just simply ignore them. And I don't want to do that to a horse. I want to aid relaxation the minute I engage with the horse. Also as well, the omo transversaris is innervated by the accessory nerve, which is a cranial nerve. So often we only think of head shaking as a trigeminal nerve issue, but if your horse has got a little bit of a head shake and then you come down and run your hand down the neck and start hitting this muscle and your horse begins to head shake, it could tell you that it may not be trigeminal. It could be something else, seasonal allergies or stuff like that. But it's always worth going to your vet and getting it investigated. So then as we come round to the front, I called this the sternobrachialis in my other video, and it is not. There is no name. So this is the sternomandibularis or the sternophalicus. So there's a lot of things that some people will call it the sternophalicus, some people will call it the sternomandibularis. In other animals and humans, the sternophalicus has a few parts, but the horse only has a sternomandibularis part. So again, when we're thinking of anatomy, try to separate the words. So think sternum, mandibular, and just take off the is or the as, and that will give you the proper name. So a lot of stuff has like mandibularis, just take off the as, and then you have the mandibular. So that's an easy way to remember. And then as we come down here, we have the descending pectorals here. And there is many names for them, but I like to just sort of say the direction they're heading, because then it's easier to remember. But first of all, again, remember I said I like to hug muscles. The subclavius is part of the pectoral group, and it goes all the way around here. So often you'll see me working like this, lifting. I can't do it on this horse, it's too little, lifting up, or working here. So I'm trying to encapsulate everything around here. So the subclavius starts here, and then we have the descending pectorals, so descending, going down. We have the transverse pectorals coming across, and then the ascending. So I like to think the ascending pectorals as little pectorals hanging under the belly, so like a little mountain climber, just hanging on. But often what you can do here, again, if your horse is a lot of time on the forehand at the minute while it's out grazing, is just get your hand and stretch down with the descending. Stretch across, so go from the medial to the lateral with the transverse, and then you can just hold up with the ascending. And horses, if your horse likes it, a lot of horses are quite funny about around the pectoral area, but that could also tell you that they're putting a lot of, they have soreness through there. So then when we're thinking about the thoracolumbar fascia, and often people just work on the top of the horse, but remember I talked about the aponeurosis. They have another structure coming down here called the linea alba, and that's like an aponeurosis, so like a big fascial suture here connecting this side to that side. So it's important that we don't just lift the bonnet and not work the engine. We need to work both top and bottom. And I often say, like the Lloyd's advert, when you see that force coming up and dissipating where it should be, you can see that nice superficial fascia and skin going like this. We do a lot to the middle. We put girths on, we put saddles on, we put training aids on, we hold the head in our hands. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and often what can happen is the force comes up and then it's like, oh, can't go any further, so it has to dissipate somewhere else. So I always think after riding, like I've said, if you just put a little massage pad, like an equilibrium pad, on a low setting, you do some nice massage moves down the back, but then you also do your ventral, which is the bottom, and the dorsal, which is the top, and you can just hold, take a big deep breath in, and just stay in the moment and just let things go, and that will just give your horse a little bit of a nice relief and let its fascia re-establish its normal. So as we come down the top, we have the nuchal ligament coming all the way down here, and then we have the supraspinaeus ligament, which comes down and ends at the sacrum. So the nuchal ligament, The two main bits you need to know about, we have the funicular cord, which is this big thick structure at the top, and then we have the lamella, which is another structure down here, and it's quite common knowledge now. So I think of them little hands holding the vertebrae, and it's quite common now that we sort of know it's partly missing at cervical vertebrae 5 and completely missing at 6 and 7. So when we ask for support, we need to think, well, how does the horse support here? And the next muscle after the lamella is the spinalis, which is a deep muscle, so your postural, spanning a couple of vertebrae but coming up like this, and often the spinalis will try and do the job that the lamella can't. So we often see these little dips appearing. It can mean that horse is just working a little bit too much, and what we need to do, instead of a horse trying to hold itself up like this, I often think of a suspension cables, that if one cable goes, the weakness is greater. Whereas if we build a foundation up, if we just take one brick away, the foundation often stays there until a couple are taken away. But what we need is a good support structure beneath, a good support structure above, and a good support structure through the middle. So I hope this helped. I'm sure I've missed something. But this is just the everyday muscles, which I will talk to my clients about, and hopefully now you may have a little bit more understanding of these everyday muscles which we come across.